Her immaculate white suit couldn't shield her from the humiliation as the security officer mocked her, pulling apart her belongings for everyone to see. The crowd whispered, their stares burning into her. But this wasn't just about her dignity. What happened next would ignite a movement no one expected. Let's start from the beginning. Cassandra Williams, a poised and self-assured businesswoman in her mid-30s, entered Los Angeles International Airport with the confidence born of countless successes. Her sharp white suit reflected her meticulous nature, and her every step commanded attention. At her side, James, her personal assistant, carried an air of calm efficiency. The bustling crowd barely noticed her as they passed smoothly through security, but Cassandra's progress was interrupted by a sharp, commanding voice. "Ma'am, I'll need to inspect your bag," said Randall Klein, a middle-aged security officer with a practiced sternness. Cassandra stopped, momentarily puzzled, her brow lifting in confusion. "Is there an issue?" Randall's eyes lingered on her designer handbag, and his tone carried an undercurrent of suspicion. "It looks questionable." The moment hung heavy in the air. Other passengers, sensing something out of the ordinary, slowed their pace to watch. The weight of their stares settled on Cassandra, their unspoken judgments cutting deeper than words. James stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Sir, there's no need for this. Her bag contains nothing but documents and personal items." Randall raised a hand to silence him, his tone hardening. "I'll determine that." He gestured for backup, as though dealing with something far more sinister than a handbag. Cassandra inhaled sharply, steadying herself. Her fists clenched briefly at her sides, the only outward sign of the frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior. She'd endured moments like this before, subtle slights, dismissive glances, but this blatant display of unwarranted scrutiny stung more deeply. "Let's not escalate this," she said evenly, attempting to maintain her composure. "I'm catching a private jet. There's no need for—" "Private jet, huh?" Randall interrupted, his smirk widening as he crossed his arms. His voice dripped with mockery, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "Let's see about that." The growing audience murmured, their gazes flitting between Cassandra and the officer. The sting of humiliation settled in as her belongings were subjected to unwarranted suspicion. But Cassandra's composure held firm, even as the moment stretched unbearably long. The search stretches painfully long, each passing second magnifying Cassandra's humiliation. Her carefully packed belongings are pulled out one by one, laid bare for all to see. Documents, cosmetics, and even intimate personal items, now exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Randall's hands linger unnecessarily as he rifles through her things, searching for a justification that clearly isn't there. The murmurs from the gathered onlookers grow louder, their judgmental whispers sharp and cutting. "Figures," a man mutters, his voice dripping with disdain. "Another one trying to act above her station," a woman sneers, her tone laced with bitterness. James, standing nearby, is visibly seething. His normally composed demeanor cracks as he takes a step forward. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he exclaims, his voice echoing through the space. "You've already checked everything. There's nothing here." But Randall doesn't even glance his way. His shrug is casual, almost dismissive, as though the protest is beneath his attention. His face remains impassive, his actions deliberate, dragging out the process unnecessarily. Cassandra's composure, so carefully maintained, begins to falter. She can feel the heat of countless eyes on her, their silent accusations stripping away her confidence layer by layer. Her chest tightens as memories bubble to the surface, moments when she had to prove her worth, fight twice as hard for the respect others received freely. Her polished exterior begins to feel like a fragile shell, cracked and fragile under the pressure of the present moment. Finally, the tension breaks as a superior officer arrives, his brow furrowed in irritation. "What's the holdup here?" he asks, his voice firm. Randall stumbles over an explanation, but his words are unconvincing. It's clear to everyone, including the superior, that this has gone too far. The officer turns to Cassandra with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry for this unnecessary delay," he says, waving her through. But the damage is already done. As Cassandra walks away, her back straight, but her steps heavier, the sting of humiliation lingers. When she finally boards her private jet, the overwhelming sense of exposure and defeat weighs on her shoulders. The confidence she had arrived with feels like a distant memory. As the private jet ascends into the skies, Cassandra sinks into her seat, staring out the window at the fading city lights. The weight of the incident presses down on her, heavier than she anticipated. She replays the events over and over. Randall's dismissive tone, the stares from the crowd, the whispered judgments. A mixture of anger and exhaustion wells up within her. She's endured moments like this for years, brushing them off, telling herself to focus on the bigger picture. But this time feels different. This time, she can't let it go. James, seated across from her, notices the storm brewing behind her composed expression. "Cassandra," he says softly, his voice cutting through the hum of the engines. "You shouldn't let this slide. People need to know this still happens." She turns to him, her jaw tightening. He's right. What happened wasn't just an insult to her dignity. It's a reflection of a systemic problem, one that countless others endure in silence. Cassandra exhales deeply, reaching for her phone. She begins typing, her fingers trembling slightly as she crafts her post. Every word is deliberate, raw, and honest. She describes the humiliation, the judgment, and the blatant prejudice she faced. She doesn't hold back, calling out the behavior for what it was, unacceptable. With one final deep breath, she hits post. The response is overwhelming. Within hours, her story spreads like wildfire, gaining traction on social media. Thousands of people share similar experiences in the comments, their voices echoing her own frustration and pain. Celebrities and activists amplify her message, calling for accountability and systemic reform. Cassandra's phone buzzes nonstop with messages of support. "You've always been a fighter," James says with a small smile, watching her read through the outpouring of encouragement. "Now you're fighting for more than just yourself." That realization ignites a new sense of purpose in Cassandra. She begins connecting with civil rights organizations, pouring her energy into campaigns for change. What started as a moment of humiliation transforms into a powerful movement, with Cassandra leading the charge for justice and equality. Months later, Cassandra stands backstage at a grand civil rights summit, the buzz of anticipation from the audience audible even behind the thick curtains. Dressed in a sleek, understated black dress, she takes a moment to steady her breath. This moment isn't just hers. It belongs to everyone who has faced the same indignities and injustices she did. As she steps onto the stage, the room erupts into applause. The bright lights are almost blinding, but Cassandra's focus remains steady. She approaches the podium, her composure calm yet commanding, her voice steady as she begins to speak. "What happened to me isn't unique," she says, her words cutting through the silence that has settled over the crowd. "It's a story too many of us know all too well, being judged, diminished, and dehumanized because of biases that have no place in our world." Her tone is both vulnerable and resolute, each word carrying the weight of her experience and the determination to change what once seemed unchangeable. The audience hangs on to her every sentence, some nodding in quiet agreement, others visibly moved. But it doesn't have to stay this way, Cassandra continues, her voice gaining strength. Together, we can ensure that these outdated biases no longer define how we're treated or how we see each other. Change begins when we stand up and demand better. Her words ignite the room, sparking a surge of energy and applause that feels electric. It's not just her story anymore. It's a collective call to action. Behind the scenes, real change begins to take shape. Policies are rewritten. Airports across the country implement mandatory anti-discrimination training. Randall, the officer who humiliated her, is dismissed after an internal investigation reveals patterns of bias. Cassandra's journey becomes more than a personal victory. Her name becomes synonymous with resilience, justice, and the power of speaking out. The emails and messages pour in, letters from strangers thanking her for giving them hope, for showing them that change is possible. As Cassandra steps off the stage to a deafening standing ovation, she allows herself a small, bittersweet smile. What started as a moment of humiliation has grown into something far greater, a movement of empowerment that will outlast her.